Areo Hotah, Sunspear's captain of guards, wheels Prince Doran Martell onto the terrace of the water gardens so that he can watch the children playing in the fountains. The pensive, gout-afflicted Prince of Dorne has recently received word of his younger brother's death at the hands of Sir Gregor Clegane. He has said very little since reading the letter. As the day wears on, Obara Sand arrives, demanding an audience with Doran. Obara is the oldest and most militant of Oberyn Martell's bastard daughters, the so-called Sand Snakes. She claims that thousands of Dornishmen are travelling up the Boneway to bring Prince Oberyn's body home. Everyone is seething for vengeance, and they are all looking to see what Doran will do. Obara demands control of the host that has been waiting in the prince's pass since the beginning of the war. She wants to sack Old Town in response to Oberyn's killing. Doran tells her to look at the children playing in the water gardens and asks how many innocents will also be killed for the sake of her bloodlust. He tells her that he is still deliberating, but will send word of his intentions once he is ready. Obara mocks his indolence, and before leaving tells him that the only word she wants to hear is war. Doran informs Ario and his maester that he needs to return to Sunspear immediately, to settle the people and remind them that Dorne still has a lawful ruler. However, this will mean exposing the public to the extent of his disease. Maester Caliot points out that it could make Dorne seem weak in the eyes of its enemy, especially since they will have to meet with Sir Arys Oakheart, who reports back to Queen Cersei. Ario feels sad whenever he sees the young member of the Kingsguard, as he suspects that one day they will have to fight, and Sir Arys will surely die. Despite his age, the Novosi captain remains very strong and broad-shouldered. His body and face are covered with the scars of 100 past battles, and he is arguably one of the greatest warriors in Westeros. The next morning they set out for Sunspear, and halfway there are met by another sand snake, Nymeria Sand. She asks Doran's leave to travel to King's Landing to assassinate Cersei, Jaime, Tommen, and Tywin Lannister. Ario watches her warily, observing that while she is far more elegant than her older sister Obara, she is no less deadly. Doran tells her that such rash impatience is what got Oberyn killed in the first place. Lady Nym and her party gallop off angrily. They finally arrive at Sunspear, the seat of House Martell, and are met with a throng of angry jeers from the small folk, all of whom are crying out for vengeance and war. Upon entering the old palace, they are greeted by Doran's daughter Arianne and half the court, including Sir Arys and Princess Myrcella. Doran desires rest, but is informed that another sand snake is requesting a private meeting. Doran and Ario find the innocent-looking Tyrene Sand waiting for them in the throne room. Tyrene wants to crown Myrcella the lawful queen of Westeros and then bleed the Lannisters when they march south to depose her. Doran says that he will think on it. Tyrene's sweet nature wavers and she basically threatens the prince's life, provoking Ario to wrath. She quickly apologizes and departs the throne room. Fearing an uprising, Doran orders Ario to seize and imprison all 7 of Oberyn Martell's daughters currently in Dorne, starting with Obara, Nymeria, and Tyrene. The only one beyond their reach is Serella. Ario tells him it will be done. One of the reoccurring motifs throughout this chapter is the ripening and decaying of fruit. After hearing about his brother's death, Doran's only comment is that the blood oranges are well past ripe. They seem to suggest Dorne's hunger for war, which has been ripening since the sack of King's Landing. However, they may also suggest the lives of the Martell family, many of whom Doran has watched from his chair as they've laughed and played and grown up in the water gardens, only to be cut down before their time. Whereas Doran himself has been left to rot on the vine, so to speak. His gout is even compared to fruit, summoning up images of grape-like toes, melon-shaped knees, and bruised purple blotches along his skin. And then when Doran arrives in Sunspear, the crowd even starts throwing rotten fruit at him, perhaps signifying all of the hundreds of lives that will be cast away in service to the war Dorne has been starving after for the past 17 years, the war that Doran must avert at all costs. Do you want to have a go at Arys Zakobina?
Sure. I can sort of give a basic outline of what Arys gets up to in his one chapter.
Yeah, anything's fine. That's cool.
Yeah, I would just say that, he disguises himself in Sunspear to go visit Arianne to have some fun times. and through this process, we sort of figure out his sort of moral dilemma of being a Kingsguard and sort of breaking the chastity law that they have. And that's probably the most interesting thing we get out of it. And also sort of viewing Arianne first from his perspective, I think is interesting because she's pretty much the more interesting character and the one that we obviously are going to get more of because Arys does die pretty quickly as the story plays out. And it's just interesting to view who she is, the sort of like, I don't know, like very animalistic sort of like living character as opposed to Arys, and we get that from his point of view. And from there, there really isn't much. We sort of just see like his involvement with Marcella and sort of his dilemma there. He sort of is very attached to her, and yet he wants to help out Arianne as well, and he kind of has that sort of conflict. And I would say that's the most interesting thing from here.
Yeah, definitely. And it's sort of the whole thing is just Arianne trying to convince him that she should take up Marcella's crown. So, Bina, do you want to go with Arianne's next chapter?
Yeah, so, I mean, Arianne's interesting because we typically see her through men's eyes before we see her POVs. And I think that will be interesting to discuss because the portraits we get both from Ario and Arys in Feast for Crows are really highly sexualized, and I think I have some problems with those, but we can discuss. And of course, she's very aware of how people see her, and she plays on that, so she definitely uses her sexual wiles to get what she wants. But in the Arys chapter, we definitely learn that she resents Quentyn because she feels her father has put his claim before hers, and she already has plans for Marcella. In Arianne 1, which is called The Queenmaker, which is a really nice allusion to The Princess and the Queen, we basically have the failed plot and the death of Arys. And, Arianne's logic is she believes Quentyn has the Golden Company behind him. So she, a bit like Melisandre, completely wrongly reads into bits of information that she has. So she basically takes Marcella, starts calling her Grace, and explains that she wants to have her crowned under Dornish law. Then, of course, someone's apparently snitched, which we can discuss who, or maybe no one, because it's not like nobody had discussed the idea of promoting Marcella's claim. And basically, they're confronted by Areo Hotah and his long axe. And then we have this really bizarre scene in which Arys, in a kind of guilt-ridden suicide, just launches into this massive attack on Ario that he knows he can't win, which you can either view as very honorable or as very stupid. And I think Arianne has almost both opinions at once. And then the other kind of interesting thing in that chapter for Arianne is not about Arianne at all, but about Marcella, that we have lots of evidence that Marcella is actually really bright. She knows why the scepter dyed her hair when she was being brought south, that it was a disguise. We know that she plays very successfully Saivas, and that she's clever. And she's rightfully suspicious when people start calling her Grace. And we also, in this chapter, get our first real insight into Darkstar and that awful, cheesy line, "I am of the night." And also that he's just really stupid that he would have killed Marcella had not someone intervened. And, that Arianne's dealing with people like Doran, who are tactically clever but don't reveal stuff, or people like Darkstar, who are just tactically stupid. So I feel she's this really frustrated, ambitious but very frustrated woman in Arianne 1. And then in her second and final chapter in Feast for Crows, Arianne 2, it's called The Princess in the Tower, which again is a really lovely allusion to the War of the Roses and the princes in the tower, kept there by Richard III. And she's isolated. She's surprisingly sad about Arys. And she has all these plans about how she's going to confront her father and make him feel uncomfortable by wearing these sort of very revealing clothes. But he just won't see her. And she kind of is forced into a hunger strike. And I guess the first time I read it, I thought that's what forced Doran to see her. But actually, Doran finally sees her because he realizes he needs Arianne to manipulate Marcella to lie about how Sir Arys Oakheart died when Sir Balin Swan turns up with Gregor Clegane's head. So he definitely needs Arianne at this point. We also learn that Darkstar has escaped. And we just see a lot more about the reality of what was going on with Arianne and Doran. And we learn about all the unsuitable matches Doran made for Arianne, how annoyed she was with that, how she tried to seduce Renly comedically, unsuccessfully. And Doran finally reveals that he had betrothed Arianne to Viserys, and that's why he was putting up these really unsuitable marriage contracts so that she would turn them all down. So you just feel that through Feast for Crows, you have this very frustrated, ambitious, misguided woman who's finally clued in. And I see a lot of parallels between Doran and Arianne, and the way Robb treats Edmure. How much, when these guys have their big strategic plots, how much should they clue other people in so that they don't go off and do stuff that's contrary to the plan? And then finally, we get one Arianne chapter in Dance with Dragons, which once again, we see her through men's eyes first, as very like alluring and oriental.
Yeah.
And she's trying to seduce Balon Swan, her classic MO, which basically seems to be get into someone's pants in order to manipulate them. He's a little bit more resisting because he's not so much of a sort of shy virgin as Arys was. And she wants to go to King's Landing instead of Nym. She wants to kind of be active. She's ambitious. But finally, this time, Doran does clue her in and says, no, you're too valuable. Quinton's gone off. I've got another important task for you. ... which we will hear more of in The Winds of Winter. So, you know, it's short chapters. I feel she's an ambitious, clever woman. She gets the wrong end of the stick. She's surrounded by people who aren't massively helpful. And I think George R. R. Martin treats her a little bit. It's an interesting way of writing about her to always show her in a very physical, sexualized manner, put it that way.
Yeah, she's an interesting character, and I think that final one in A Dance with Dragons is actually from Areo Hotah's point of view, which is bizarre because, like, you'd think of all the POV characters in the book for the Dornish, it'd be Arianne, but they keep sort of switching back to Ario, who doesn't really have anything to say. We learn a bit about his sort of life on Norvos, how he was sold to the bearded priests and wed to his axe and branded as a slave and taught to obey his command. But yeah, what do you guys think of Areo Hotah?
Well, I really do love that first chapter in A Feast for Crows, the Captain of the Guard chapter. It really is, I think, some of the best prose that George has written in the books. It's just really, really good writing there. But there is that genuine question: why is this the perspective? What is the storytelling purpose of using Areo Hotah as your lens?
One interesting thing about Ario is that he's the only POV character from Essos that we get in the series. And apart from prologues, he's the only character who's kind of low-born or essentially begins his life as a slave.
That's a good point.
All the other characters are Westerosi. Yeah, it's interesting.
Unless we ever get Varys chapters, I guess.
Oh, I doubt he'd give us Varys chapters. Or Littlefinger. They know too much, yeah.
I find it interesting. I hate the fact that we switch back to Ario in Dance with Dragons. I feel that George R. R. Martin really slights Arianne. She's clearly the protagonist. She's clearly the one who's going to have an interesting time of making alliances. And it's just a bizarre decision. I mean, I get that on one level he wants to show how men view her. But to switch back to Ario, I found a real sort of conservative retrograde step.
Yeah, it's almost like we're deliberately being kept apart from the Dornish characters by seeing them from a sort of outside point of view. I mean, he almost is this kind of observing guard number 3 that Martin, you know, has resisted for so long. He's always tried to build the narrative from the perspective of characters. You know, you start with a character with their own personality and their anxieties, and then you sort of build the world outwards. But Ario doesn't really have any of that kind of internal development or anything. I think one possibility is that he's keeping him around kind of on ice because he wants to split the two characters up at one point. So Arianne will go and try and, you know, suss out this fleet of ships that are coming in from Lys, whether they're connected to Daenerys or Aegon or whatever, and that Ario will remain in Sunspear to observe something important, or maybe even go off and try and hunt down Darkstar.
Yeah, but if you need a character in Sunspear, use Myrcella, use Dorne, use somebody who's actually a protagonist. I mean, maybe
there's
Ario
a reason not to
like
use Doran. There's a reason not to use Doran because he's another one of those characters that's just too privy to information we shouldn't, I guess, know about as readers. But yeah, there is definitely a question: why Areo Hotah?
But then I would argue once again, like, I keep saying this in every podcast, and I really love George R. R. Martin. I think he's amazing, but there seems to be a theme in FeastDance where he's written himself into positions where he has to use POVs that he doesn't necessarily want to use, like having to use Barristan. And maybe having to use Ario, even though he's not as interesting of himself, because he just needs to have a person in a certain location, and maybe that's not the best planning. I can't believe I'm sounding so critical.
No, I totally agree with that idea, and it was a very strange choice to choose him over Arianne when she was clearly the better option in that situation in Dance. I don't know why he did that exactly. I think that the only Areo Hotah chapter we necessarily needed was the first one to give us that perspective and that situation at the Gardens. But I don't know.
Unless he plans for him to do something amazing with Myrcella,
Right.
and therefore he's giving him time.
Right. Right now he's static, but I guess you could make the argument he will be developed further. But it definitely seems a little bit strange right now.
I think Myrcella is being sent off back to King's Landing with Lady Nym, so she's probably out of the picture at this point, whereas Ario remains in Sunspear. I think it might have something to do, if he's going to remain in Dorne, I think it'll be about Darkstar, either because Obara and Sir Balon Swan have been sent after Darkstar. And the important thing about Darkstar is if he kills them or if he imprisons them or whatever, that might provoke the Iron Throne to declare war on the Dornish. So, Doran understands that even though the Dornish are really in love with their own strength and their own ferocity and power, the Dorne is actually far less populated and far less strong than the rest of the kingdoms think. The young dragon who originally conquered them bolstered a lot of their strength and overestimated a lot of their strength to make his conquest seem actually greater. But in reality, Dorne isn't as powerful as it seems, so he can't afford to have an open war with the Iron Throne, so he needs to suppress any attempts. So if Darkstar does something with Obara and another member of the Kingsguard, he needs to stop that happening. So Ario might be what sort of steps in to sort of quell that situation, which could be a cool sort of chapter. Even if we don't get interesting development from a character point of view, it could be a cool action set piece.
And I feel Darkstar's being set up for that, right? Sorry, Zach. I feel that the fact that he angrily almost killed Myrcella shows he's being set up as someone intemperate who could, be the guy who triggers a war. I do feel that Dorne has one advantage, and this is where Ramin would be really strong on tactically knowing that it doesn't have the numbers and it doesn't have the wealth, but it does have this territory that's really inhospitable. So even if they're in open war with someone, if they can manage to fight a defensive war on their own territory in the heat and the arid steppes, they might just about be okay.
Yeah, we learn that I think, is it Arianne that describes Dorne has two weapons, the spears and the sun. So that's kind of why they take it as their sigil. They're warriors, and they often employ guerrilla combat to deal with an invading force. But ultimately, it's the sun itself that actually welts all of their enemies because they're marching in this heavy armor in huge hosts, and they kind of just melt beneath the glaring, blazing Dornish sun.
I just don't see the war moving to Dorne, though. I feel like especially with Aegon's arrival, it's very much focused in the Crownlands and the Stormlands. I can't see there being a conflict moving down there.
Dorne doesn't necessarily know that, yeah.
That's true. That's true. It's more a question of the logistics of keeping Areo Hotah as a character and Darkstar's relevance and those sort of things.
Yeah, I agree. It's also what saves Dorne time and again, right? The fact that if any kind of invading force needs to go for places like King's Landing and Storm's End, they need to go for these major strongholds. Like, Dorne is never first on your list to invade, and it's difficult. So the fact that they don't have wealth and there's not much there also saves them because they're not one of the primary targets of any invasion.
Yeah, I think all the different Sand Snakes have plans to deal with enacting vengeance upon Oberyn's murder, but Obara, have probably the stupidest decision. She wants to actually take the Dornish army out of Dorne and attack Old Town, and which is impossible. You're not going to take Old Town and hold it.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
It's pure bloodlust. But I think Tyrene's, even though war is probably the bad thing for Dorne in any account, hers is probably the most practical, which is to crown Myrcella and actually provoke the Lannisters to attack Dorne and then bloody them as they kind of march through their lands.
At this stage,
that's exactly
Aegon
how you
in
do.
play.
Ultimately, what Arianne
At this stage, with Aegon in play, there is that definite potential that they will march out to follow him, since that's been Doran's plan all along to ally himself with the Targaryens.
Which is why I think Obara is going to she's going to do something rash in her fight with, or in hunting down Darkstar, and end up being captured or killed.
I don't know. I mean, I think I think a lot depends on. Given Arianne's ambitions, and we know that she has wanted to marry well and she knows that there were plans. Would she aspire to marry Fagon? Who would she aspire to marry? And who, when she set out on the road, will she try and seduce? That, to me, is the wild card of Arianne.
That is true. And I think the question of Fagon is going to be interesting moving forward if people find out about that, or even if they do, if it matters, because really, at this point, whoever has just the control is really the one that's going to dictate things in terms of military strength and position.
And it's hard to see why Fagon would want to marry, if you had a choice of potentially hooking up with your cousin, Dany, or, of all the people that Fagon in a position of strength, when he has King's Landing and Storm's End, and he has the Golden Company, who will he want to ally with? Is Arianne really going to be high up on the list just because back in the day they shared this kind of, tragedy of the Dornish princess, come on, he's
I
going to be
would see
practical.
him. I don't know. I would see Aegon being caught up sort of in the romance of that, but I think I guess it depends what happens with Dany. She's definitely another wild card at play with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and Dany and Arianne also have these weaknesses for hot-looking dumbass men, right? And again, I find that slightly lazy, not lazy writing. I just find it really annoying that George R. R. Martin cannot have a hot young woman without giving her a fondness for bad boys who look hot. It's like maybe some of them can actually just be sensible in who they consort with. I mean,
I wouldn't call Arys a bad guy though, or yeah, he's just kind of dumb.
no, but she uses Arys, but then she says about Darkstar, like she talks about how good looking Darkstar is and how, and of course, there's a theory that Darkstar is really Aegon as well, so we should probably discuss that. But
Really?
she talks about how, yeah.
Oh,
Have you not heard that one?
no.
I have not heard. Go on, please. I don't know how
What?
that works.
What's the theory?
So this might be second only to my Quentin as alive crackpot theory. And you see, what happens is when we have these Dornish podcasts, because I'm not that into Dorne and I think I won't have anything to say, what happens is I crawl through Westeros to find out what are the interesting things other people have had to say. And then that leads me down all sorts of rabbit holes. But the theory is that Doran, we know, is bright, and yet he sent off his son Quentin on a mission he must have known was doomed to failure, which seems pretty either callous and or tactically stupid. And he chose not to tell Arianne and, all the stuff he does, which seems kind of so patient and why. And maybe the reason is that he feels he really does have an ace up his sleeve, which is that he knows the true Aegon, which is Darkstar. And apparently there are some sort of physical similarities between Darkstar and a Targ, and that it could be Aegon, the ages are kind of similar. And maybe that's what Doran is hoping to play as his final card. So I'm explaining it quite badly, but that's basically it.
But yeah, I think the Danes.
Darkstar was in the Tower of Joy time. It wasn't Jon, because there was being defended by Kingsguard.
Yeah.
No,
so.
I'm just kidding.
Is it?
It could be.
Is it Darkstar like 25 years old or something?
That's true.
Yeah, and
I think he's over old for it.
He's older than Arianne.
Exactly. Although his age is something easy to disguise around that time. But I think that it's a theory that I have no credence for. I have no time for it. But I just think that it stems from this desperation to justify what Doran's doing, because we see that Doran's bright. Why is he doing things that we kind of don't understand in terms of the logic? Just as I think the Grand Northern Conspiracy stems from a desire to see the Starks triumph, so people are willing to believe it. There's a sense in which as readers we believe in theories because we have this desperation to see characters we like not be stupid.
But no one likes Darkstar, so.
Darkstar is a douchebag, right? I mean, there's so much in this character.
He's hilarious.
It's almost like in Dorne, George feels that he has the license to create characters that are just, let's create the pantomime villain in Darkstar. Let's create the sort of, the hot Oriental chick in Arianne. It's just sort of, it feels a little bit, I know he's mocking it. He's not doing it seriously, but it's just a bit annoying. Yeah, I kind of feel he's better than that.
It's almost like a world apart from the Seven Kingdoms. It doesn't even. It seems very the sort of goings on in Dorne seem very almost tangential to the main conflict for the Iron Throne. They're just having their own. They're playing out their own little conflict in Dorne. And I think more than any of the other regions, except maybe the North, there's this sense of the Dorne are like a nation unto themselves. And even the small folk actually get all riled up when one of their princes is attacked. It's not like they have loyalties to individual lords and things like that. They think of themselves as a nation. They even have their own sort of languages, their own customs and religion. It's interesting that they're so sort of isolated. They've been so sort of isolated from the rest of the Seven Kingdoms for so long that they develop this kind of internal dialogue.
I kind of think of them as a bit like Scotland in the United Kingdom, that it's a country that's part of the United Kingdom, so laws and whatever apply, but it's got its own rich culture. It's only been part of the United Kingdom for like 300 or 400 years, so it's kind of relatively recent. People have, and rightly so, a strong sense of their own nationhood, and so it's part of the kingdoms, but it's a very loose confederation.
Yeah, I've heard comparisons to Wales as well, especially with, the English trying to come into Wales and being kind of unable to defeat this inferior power because of, guerrilla tactics and things like that.
Yeah, similar. It's just I feel that we conquered Wales so much earlier that the Welsh have less of a sense of, I don't know, maybe that's insulting to Welsh people listening. I always feel that Scotland's more recent, and Scotland's the country that next year is going to have a referendum to leave the United Kingdom. It feels much more real as a possibility. Just as Dorne, you can see it's a breakaway state quite easily.
But speaking of its isolation, I just also have that issue of really caring about Dorne in the grand scheme, because there's just the concern of what is their part going to be moving forward. Obviously, there is potential that the Sand Snakes and all that are going to have interesting things, but I don't know. I find their culture interesting and some of the characters interesting, like Arianne and the Sand Snakes. But I don't know. It just seems like they seem like a non-factor compared to a lot of the other characters.
I think the problem is it seems to be leading somewhere interesting, but we ultimately don't get there. We see Prince Doran finally sort of gain the loyalty of the Sand Snakes in that final chapter, and he sends them off on all these really exciting missions. But then that's kind of the final chapter. We only get that one chapter in A Dance with Dragons. We don't really see where any of that intrigue leads to. So hopefully we'll see some of that in Book 6.
Yeah, I mean, I've said many times that Dorne is the region I found the most frustrating, partly because I find Doran's reasoning quite frustrating, but it's the one that I'm almost most interested to see in the next book, just because we've got the Quinton is dead wild card, even if I admit it, and we've got Arianne ambitious out there, single, wanting to marry an ally. We've got Darkstar, this douchebag wild card. There's just so many little sparks, and history tells us these major world wars can be sparked by really kind of bizarre little random events. So I feel they have their part to play. But I really want Amin to do a big Dawn special podcast where he tells us not defends Dawn, but I really want to hear more about why he's so fascinated with it, because I'm sure there's stuff I'm missing.
Definitely. For me, I just sympathize so much more and am personally more invested in the North and that sort of stuff, especially after reading The Conspiracy. I just think, I don't know, it just feels like that's where the story belongs to me after it started there, and sort of that's the major center of a lot of the characters that we began with. I don't know. It's just hard for me personally to get invested in something so far-flung from that.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is we don't really see these people until Book 4. We see a bit of the Red Viper in Book 3, and it does sound, Dawn certainly sounds very interesting from afar, but once we actually get there isn't a whole lot going on, and it is split so much between these POV chapters. We only get, 5 Dornish chapters in 2 books, and 2 of them are a random guard, 2 of them are Arianne, which is interesting, and 1 is just this sort of one-shot character who dies. So we don't really have the time to get invested and emotionally connected to these characters the way we did with the Starks and the Lannisters.
Yeah. I also feel the same way about the Iron Islands.
Oh, Nadi's back.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here. I was just saying, what I like about Doran is that he chose the option where, the least people would die, even though he wants revenge for his sister. But, he decided not to go out for all-out war. He decided to play the long game, which I think was kind of nice of him, since most lords don't really care about their small folk.
Yeah, no, I really admire Doran. I think the fact that he wants to have prolonged peace, even though him as a person is, wants to absolutely tear the Lannisters apart with his bare hands, he actually, I think he kind of recounts the story of the first Daenerys, who sort of married into the Dornish and brought them into the realm, and how she watched the children, the highborn children and the lowborn children playing in the water gardens and not being able to tell the difference, and saying, this is what's important, this is your realm. It's the sort of innocence that you have to protect. And the failure, it's easy for a lord to call the spears to war. The hard part is this prolonged peace, and trying to have a stable realm. And that's what Doran wants ultimately. Even if he desires to go to war and avenge his kin, he wants prolonged peace. He wants to have a stable realm and to protect the people he loves.
See, my issue isn't with the fact that Doran's playing a long game and that he privileges peace, because God knows Westeros needs rulers who actually care about peace. But it's the fact that, number one, I just still to this day do not understand the tactical merits of sending Quinton off. And secondly, that as Arianne got older and was visibly more frustrated with the lack of suitable suitors, that he didn't clue her in. It just,
I put this question in the docs. When I was reading the chapter, he was pretty clear. If I had told you, you would have blabbed it to the Sand Snakes, and then they would have blabbed to their lovers, and then it would have gone on from there, and he didn't want anyone to know at the time. And he had no idea how much Arianne resented him. He didn't know if she had read his letter to Quinton. So I used to think the same way, that why didn't Doran tell Arianne earlier? But then he was right in a way, because I don't think Arianne would have kept it to herself. She would have told people.
Why do you think that? Because of how she operated with the conspiracy?
Yeah, I think she told too many people. I think she trusted too many people.
Yeah, I think it was a tough position that
Yeah,
Doran
sorry
was in.
about the kids shouting in the background.
That's okay. It was a tough position because he needed to show that he was trying to set up marriage alliances, even though he was still trying to keep Viserys on ice. I guess, yeah, if there is a criticism of him, he's just too cautious. He's too kind of Tywin describes him as indolent. You know, he takes too much time to make his deliberations, and maybe that's good in the long game. The overarching strategy that he's building might be working to something really powerful, but the Game of Thrones doesn't really work that way. It's more you have to be able to adapt quickly to changing scenarios. Like, how is he going to adapt to the fact that Quentyn's been killed? You know, he may seem like a master and this really cautious guy. I mean, you know, he describes himself as the grass, always moving with the breeze, while actually concealing the snakes. But how is he going to react?
Like
yeah, I love that description. I love when he starts to really say, you know, I'm not the lazy guy you think I am. Me and your father work together. But ultimately, how is he going to be able to change to this kind of rapid changing sort of landscape, political landscape? I don't know if he'd be able to play it as well as he has these past 17 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I just sort of feel that to play the Game of Thrones, one must perforce throw the dice. You know, there has to be some calculated risk. You cannot seek vengeance for your family and seek power without risking something. And of course, you mustn't risk all. You mustn't be intemperate like Darkstar, but he almost wants too much. You can't play this game and just be utterly protected on every side and every decision you take. And this kind of this ultra long game, patient, etc. planning, to me, it just doesn't match with sending Quentyn off to Dany. And I don't see that as part of that long conservative game. So I don't understand him, and I get very frustrated by actors whose rationale I don't get.
Well, I guess Quentyn was throwing the dice.
He expected Daenerys to reach Westeros a long time ago, especially after she married Drogo and she had her army. She still didn't move to Westeros. So I think that might have hastened his decision, you know, to send Quentyn, because presumably they were going to wait until she came, but it didn't happen.
It's interesting when you pair him up with Varys and Illyrio, because they're clearly taking a lot of very flippant risks by just throwing Dany and Viserys off with the Dothraki. I mean, anything could have happened. Anything did happen. Viserys died.
Couldn't that have been their plan? I mean,
it could have been their plan, but I feel like it doesn't match with
get
Doran's
rid of
caution.
the other Targaryens to make Aegon the sole heir.
Yeah, I just don't feel like Dorne would go along with that sort of thing. I feel like that if he is truly very cautious, why would he allow such a risk without visibly going against that decision?
It's kind of confusing. We don't know enough yet, I think.
Yeah, I just agree with Bina that his rationale seems to be a little bit spotty in terms of his patience, not trusting Arianne with the information.
I think he waited too long. He waited too long.
Not taking action and yet making some very odd choices that don't seem to suit that character. I don't know. I don't buy the brilliance that a lot of people tend to attribute to him.
Yeah, but you know, in a way, it's kind of like I'll give Doran and indeed George the benefit of the doubt for another book, because ultimately maybe this all pays off. But at present, it's deeply frustrating.
Yeah, I guess the test will be in how the Sand Snakes do, and how he's able to position Aegon's Landing to Dorne's benefit. Yeah.
And yet he shows he can act quickly and swiftly and ruthlessly by imprisoning the Sand Snakes. So we know he can act when he needs to, when he perceives he needs to. But it's like I say, I think it's going to be fascinating the next book to see how he develops in reaction to what's going on.
That's a very minor play, though, compared to some of these bigger decisions. It's kind of just pacifying the local unrest, as opposed to a bigger power play in terms of the scope of the realm.
True. I was just trying to be nice because I feel like I've slacked over about like 4 successive podcasts, and I'm being really mean, and I don't mean to be, but yeah.
Oh, that's okay. We should have differing opinions, right? Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, I feel we need a real defender of Dorne, though. Like amongst vassals, we you know, Amin is a defender of Dorne, but I don't feel that any of the vassals are really truly pro.
I think I would, if I had to live anywhere, I think I would live in Dorne, because the Lord would be, would be considerate of what would happen to you if there was a war. It's obviously the terrain is such that you can hide in case of war. There are a lot of mountains and stuff. You can retreat if nothing else works. So I think it would be kind of safe to live there. compared to
You have,
the
as a
land
woman,
or-
you have to live there, don't you? Because you get sexual freedom
Yeah.
plus you inherit.
Right.
I mean, you'd be an
Culturally
idiot to live
speaking-
anywhere else.
Culturally speaking, it's appealing. It's just the characters themselves. I just, for the most part, like Doran, I just don't find as fascinating.
I want to read more about the old toad. Is that what she was called?
Yeah.
The lady princess
Was it
of
Mors
Dorne.
Martell? Yeah.
No, not Mors Martell. Her name was something else. The one who resisted when Aegon the Conqueror arrived in King's Landing.
Oh, okay. I thought it was Mors. Yeah, she says.
Mors is the one who married Nymeria.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, she says what? This is Dorne. You are not welcome here, or something like that. And
I want to read more about her.
Yeah, I remember Mors Martell from the awful Song of Ice and Fire or RTS game that was released. That's one of the things you'd play. You do the Nymeria Mors Martell relationship in that. But yeah, side tangent.
So do you guys think, Beanie, you seem to suggest that it was maybe Arys that actually ratted out Arianne, who is kind of overcome by guilt, and possibly wanted to commit suicide, but also try and maintain his love with Arianne.
No, I think his guilt-ridden suicide is more guilt at having shagged Arianne. I think he's just your classic sort of repressed Catholic schoolboy.
Right.
So I think that's the guilt. It's sexual guilt. I don't think he ratted Arianne out. I don't think he had the balls to do it. I think that.
Right.
In fact, I don't think anyone, and even I don't think anyone ratted Arianne out. I think.
Yeah, I think Doran
just figured it out. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't the most subtle of plans. I think there were enough people whispering about potentially promoting Myrcella's claim, and Doran's not an idiot.
Tyene much told Doran, you should crown her now, and Tyene is Arianne's closest friend. So
that's true. Yeah.
I think it's
floats
pretty
the
easy
idea.
to guess, what Arianne is going to do next. But that doesn't explain how Areo Hotah and the rest of his men were waiting in that particular pole boat. If there had been a chase and they had hunted them down, that would have made sense. Okay, so Doran guessed, he sent out his men to find them, but they were waiting at the exact same spot where they are heading. So that suggests that maybe Doran knew more of the plan, more of the exact plan.
I think that the point that Areo Hotah makes about having to fight Arys, I guess you could attribute to his sort of weird fatalism, but it could be a hint that he's aware of the plan, that Doran has tipped him off, and that's the thing they know is going to happen.
I mean, in fairness, Arianne does at some point say later, looking at my 3 closest friends who I took with me on this jaunt, one of them obviously snitched on me, and maybe it is one of them, but honestly, they're so indistinguishable as characters. They come so late to the game. I just really don't give a shit.
It could
Like,
also,
I can't get invested in some kind of, was it person A, person B, or person C? That's just totally uninteresting to me at this point.
Yeah, it's never really bothered me either. I don't care who talked.
yeah,
Exactly.
the lesson might be more from Doran to say, keep your secrets a lot closer than you have been doing. It doesn't actually matter which character in fact did it. It's the fact that Doran is trying to say, don't be so, keep your secrets closer to your chest. But yeah, I do think Arianne definitely sort of changes and matures a lot more. You're saying that Martin does sometimes create these characters, or these female characters, who are attracted to bad boys. But I think after her coup sort of fails, she does change and mature as a person. Even
I do
Ario
really
sort of
like the
comments on it.
Princess in the Tower chapter. I think it's fun to see kind of her go through that isolation process, trying to figure stuff out. I think that's a good character development.
Yeah, the whole first half of that is just her waiting in a room, and it kind of gets boring, but it's also sort of really interestingly written. And then the second half is this really great conversation between her and Doran, and it's not just the sort of exposition and learning all of these secrets that Doran has, but it's also this really kind of heartbreaking conversation where all of this bitterness that Arianne's been storing up over the years starts sort of pouring out. Even when she admits to having sex with Sir Arys, it's done to wound him, and he kind of is taken aback by it. And even though you can tell she still loves him, she's so kind of bitter about the way she perceives he's treated her.
Yeah, it's a wonderfully written chapter, and I love the reflection of her just thinking about life and her surprise at being moved by Arys. And one thing to say pro Arianne is that she's a good person, right? I mean, she thinks she wants what's right. She doesn't act out of, okay, there's bitterness and there's ambition because she feels her claim has been denied, but I get the impression she's a good person, that she wants to do the right thing. She wants to be a good ruler. She just wants her entitlement, but not in a whiny, I'm the Queen of Dragons kind of a way. And that now that Yeah, and now that Doran has clued her in, she's going to be a faithful part of his plans. She's going to execute out what he needs doing. And I feel they're quite a powerful duo now, just intellectually. They're on the same page. And I kind of like Arianne. I want to spend time with her. But
I think maybe Doran might have been wrong if he had trusted her with the plan and explained it to her. You can't tell this to anyone else. Then she might not have talked.
Or maybe now was the right time to reveal it to her, now that she is a bit more mature and has lost Arys and has, maybe this is the perfect time to tell her. But I just feel that there aren't that many female characters I like spending time with in these books, and I think she's one of them.
Yeah, that might be the reason that we get those first 2 chapters from a male point of view, because she does sort of come off as this kind of scheming temptress. But in that chapter, in those sort of 2 chapters from her point of view, we do get this real sense of regret and compassion for Arys. She's not Cersei. She doesn't just throw men to their deaths for her own, not amusement, but for her own ambition. She does feel terrible about what happened and the fact that Myrcella was maimed. So yeah, I do find her a very sympathetic character.
Yeah, and I get there's real respect and fondness for Myrcella. I think she likes Myrcella, and it's not just about using Myrcella to make a point. I think she genuinely does like this kid. Yeah,
I was kind of with you, Bina, when the first time I read it, I wasn't really into the Dornish, but I think this second reread, I am kind of on board with Arianne. I'm like looking forward to seeing what she does in the next couple of books.
They're better than the new Ironborn characters. That's for sure.
God.
Victarion is a really low benchmark.
Yeah, and Aeron too.
Victarion.
Oh.
Yeah. Apart from 42, aka Vic, who loves Victarion, obviously. But
any more on the Dornish?
No, that is it, I think. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's everything. I mean, it was only 4 or 5 chapters, so there wasn't much to...
And we still managed to talk for an hour and a half.
That's okay. So I think that's everything. That's pretty much the last chapter we had to do.
Do you want to do the Grand Northern Conspiracy another time, or as a separate?
I'm happy to do it now if everyone's up for it, or if anyone's up to it. What do you reckon, Zach?
I'm down for anything.
That's what I like to hear.